a locked VIN, a blacklisted parts network, and a manufacturer who told the world this exact car could never be rebuilt outside of their own factory. That was Bugatti's official position on a crashed Chiron Pur Sport that its owner had bought back from a Copart salvage auction for $1.9 million. What followed was months of engineering work, improvised solutions, and a YouTube rebuild series that pulled in tens of millions of views from people who had never cared about hypercars before, because the story at the center of it was not really about the car at all. It was about who gets to decide what happens to something you legally own, and it played out live on camera in an unauthorized Miami workshop with a garbage bin wheel holding up one of the rarest automobiles ever built. Alex Gonzalez, known online as FXLXG, owned one of approximately 60 Chiron Pur Sports ever produced. At that production volume, and with a new price between $4 and $4.5 million, every example taken permanently off the road represents a real mathematical reduction in how many of these cars will ever exist. After the crash, his insurance company settled the claim, and the car moved to a Copart salvage auction as a declared total loss, which is where Alex bid on his own former car and won it back for $1.6 million, with total costs reaching $1.9 million after fees. He did not buy it to part it out or preserve it behind glass. He bought it with the specific intention of making it run again, and that decision alone set every subsequent conflict in motion. The damage underneath the cosmetic destruction was the part that actually defined the challenge. Both airbags had deployed. Carbon fiber panels had fractured across multiple surfaces. The horseshoe grille feeding all four of the W16's turbochargers was gone entirely. Headlights were destroyed. And most critically, the gearbox transmission mounts had taken damage that was not superficial, while the carbon fiber monocoque, the structural spine of any hypercar at this level, had absorbed an impact of unknown consequence. Carbon fiber does not flex and recover the way steel does. When it cracks, determining whether that crack compromises the entire structural integrity of the vehicle is the difference between something safe to drive and something that is not. And that question sat unresolved at the center of everything that came next. Bugatti flew a technician from their headquarters in Molsheim, France, to inspect the damage in person. Their initial restoration quote came in at approximately $1.7 million in parts and labor. Alex declined. The manufacturer returned with a reduced figure of around $600,000. Alex declined that as well. And that is when Bugatti made the decision that transformed this from a private repair disagreement into a story that eventually reached 60 million viewers across multiple continents. They locked the VIN. Every Bugatti dealership across their entire network received notification that no official part could be sold for this specific vehicle. The car had been blacklisted from its own manufacturer's supply chain, completely and globally. Mate Rimac, the CEO of Bugatti Rimac, addressed the situation publicly and by direct message, stating that only 2 facilities in the world could properly repair a crashed Bugatti, and that only specially trained technicians could safely disassemble the vehicle. The engineering points he raised were technically accurate, and his concern about a 1,600 horsepower machine being rebuilt without factory oversight was a genuine safety argument, not purely a commercial one. The problem was the context surrounding it. The Chiron Pur Sport carries approximately 1,900 components with no aftermarket equivalent anywhere in the world. The turbochargers, the sequential gearbox, the carbon ceramic brake system, the rear wheel steering assembly, the entire bespoke suspension geometry, none of those parts exist outside of Bugatti's own supply chain. Locking that VIN did not simply mean declining to help. It meant actively removing the possibility of a standard repair pathway from an owner who had paid nearly $2 million for a car he legally owned. And that distinction is the one that 60 million people eventually responded to. Alex decided to force the conversation into the open. His Instagram post gave Bugatti a 24-hour deadline. Unblacklist this car or we will 3D print all parts. That post was designed to pull a response from a manufacturer that had been comfortable operating in silence behind the blacklist. The response came directly from Mate Rimac in a message that opened with, "Hey man, Bugatti CEO here." He explained why the 3D printing approach was not viable, pointing to the gearbox and the carbon fiber monocoque as components that consumer fabrication methods could not replicate to the standards a 1600 horsepower drivetrain demands. A phone call followed the direct message, and by the end of it, Bugatti had officially lifted the VIN blacklist. What did not follow was substantive factory cooperation. The blacklist came down, but the engineering problems that defined the rebuild still had to be solved without manufacturer support, and the most demanding of those problems was the one Bugatti had used to anchor their entire case for why this repair was impossible outside of their Molsheim facilities, splitting the chassis. Matt Armstrong arrived in Miami with a camera and a YouTube channel that had cleared 6 million subscribers through years of luxury and performance vehicle rebuilds, accumulating views in the high hundreds of millions. The Bugatti project was immediately the most high-profile work he had ever taken on, and the audience response to the early episodes was immediate because the conflict driving the story reached people who had no particular interest in automotive content. A manufacturer that had locked a VIN, a CEO who had gone on record with a safety argument, an owner who had bought his own crashed car back from a salvage auction for nearly $2 million, and a rebuild unfolding on camera in real time. The structure of it was something viewers recognized and forwarded well before any significant mechanical progress had been made. Splitting the chassis of a Chiron is the operation that provides access to the gearbox, and Bugatti had specifically named it as the procedure requiring their proprietary equipment and specially trained technicians. Matt Armstrong and his father Tony, who had joined the project in Miami, listened to that framing and built a working solution from a 2-post lift and the wheeled base of a garbage bin. Those were the supports that separated the chassis sections of a $4 million hypercar, and the operation worked. Once the split was achieved, direct inspection of the carbon tub revealed that while damage was present, most of it was minor and repairable without compromising structural integrity. The catastrophic failure the manufacturer's public statements had implied as the probable outcome of an unauthorized rebuild did not materialize as the primary finding, and that information changed the entire trajectory of the project. For components that no official channel would supply, Matt committed to a specific process. Damaged originals were 3D scanned to create precise digital models, and from those models, CNC machining produced replacement parts from appropriate materials. Mate Rimac had been accurate when he stated that 3D printing structural components for a Bugatti was not viable for a car at this power level. Matt was not 3D printing them. The scanner was a measurement tool. The CNC machine was the fabrication method, and that distinction reflects the difference between a process appropriate for a 1600 horsepower drivetrain and one that is not. It was also exactly the distinction that Bugatti's public framing had consistently blurred throughout the dispute, whether intentionally or not. Audi A3 airbags turned out to be directly compatible with the Chiron's deployment system. 10 custom radiators replaced the originals the crash had destroyed because a W16 internal combustion engine at 1600 horsepower generates heat at a scale that demands cooling infrastructure beyond what almost any other road vehicle ever requires. Valvetronic fabricated a custom exhaust system specifically for this build. E3 Customs rebuilt the interior completely, retrimming everything back to the original white and purple color scheme. None of these solutions appeared anywhere on a Bugatti-approved parts list, and every single one of them worked. And then the engine started, a W16 producing 1600 horsepower, fitted with the Valvetronic exhaust, running in a Miami workshop months after the crash that had sent it to a salvage auction as a declared total loss. For a car whose manufacturer had publicly framed an unauthorized rebuild as impossible, that startup sound carried more weight than any formal statement either side had made throughout the entire dispute. The Valvetronic exhaust system made the moment one of the most shared clips in the entire series, a 1600 horsepower W16 firing in an unapproved workshop being exactly the kind of sound that people who had been following the conflict for months had been waiting to hear. Matt Armstrong had over 6.3 million YouTube subscribers by early 2026, with total channel views in the high hundreds of millions, and the Bugatti Rebuild series had driven engagement at a level none of his previous content had reached. View counts on each significant episode did not grow gradually. They spiked, the VIN blacklist being confirmed, the CEO's direct message going public, the garbage bin chassis split, the engine firing. Each of those moments produced sharing behavior that no paid media campaign reliably manufactures. People who had never watched a rebuild channel were forwarding episodes to contacts who had no interest in automotive content, because the question at the center of this rebuild was not about a car. It was about ownership and who controls a product after it has been sold. The right to repair movement has been building across consumer electronics, automotive sectors, and agricultural machinery for years, and it tends to gain traction precisely when a specific, visible, dramatic example of the problem emerges that people can point to. The Bugatti Chiron rebuild became that example for the automotive world, the clearest possible live demonstration of what happens when a manufacturer's parts monopoly meets an owner's determination to exercise their legal rights over their own property. Alex had money, industry access, and relationships, and Bugatti still managed to make the standard repair pathway functionally unavailable the moment they locked that VIN. Financial resources alone were not enough to override the manufacturer's control over their own supply chain, and that is the detail that the audiences watching those rebuild videos understood with more sophistication than outside observers expected. The comment sections went well beyond cheering for an underdog. Detailed technical discussions about carbon fiber repair tolerances, gearbox engineering, CNC fabrication accuracy, and right-to-repair legislation in various markets filled every upload, because the audience Matt Armstrong had built over years of technically honest content was exactly the right one for a story this layered. Mate Rimac eventually adjusted his public position, describing his earlier intervention as a safety concern rather than a commercial strategy, and suggesting the relationship between Bugatti and the rebuild team had become more collaborative than the early exchanges suggested. He compared his dynamic with Armstrong to a Messi and Ronaldo framing, two people operating at a high level in the same space with the internet manufacturing more conflict between them than actually existed. Whether that reframing reflected the full reality or not, it acknowledged something that could not be undone. The rebuild had happened. The engine had run. Alex paid $1.9 million at a Copart salvage auction for a car its manufacturer had declared beyond saving outside of their own facilities, and a Chiron Pur Sport that runs and reaches road-ready condition is worth multiples of that figure. The financial logic of the entire project, independent of every principle and every public statement, pointed in the same direction as the rebuild itself. What Bugatti had framed as a binary choice between an authorized factory restoration at their price or permanent loss turned out to have a third option, and it was documented on YouTube in an unapproved Miami workshop, with a garbage bin wheel holding one of the rarest hypercars ever built, while Matt Armstrong figured out how to bring it back.